Welcome to our research-based practices that build belonging skill sharing series. Today's session is grounding for the greater good, cultivating patience to interrupt reactivity and racial bias. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Juliana Tafur. I'm the Bridging Differences Program Director at UC Berkeley's Greater Good Science Center. And I have an amazing team behind the scenes, including our content and engagement manager, Kelly Rafferty, and our bridging coordinator, Chris Cuervo. Kelly will be dropping instructions on how to engage in the chat, and she'll be monitoring for questions that might come up for you. So our promise is that we'll do our best to get to some of those questions in the final minutes of the session. And before we get started, I'd love to do a quick mood check. I know before in past sessions, we've asked for your name and where you're joining from. Today, we want to ask, what's one word for how you're arriving today? And I'll put that in the chat. One word for how you're arriving today. And I'll give us a few minutes to respond. I can't help but notice the range of emotions. Thank you all for sharing. Keep them coming. We want to listen, hear you, see you through the chat. Pulled, curious, engaged, interested, distracted. Someone said already grounded. Great. Motivated, overwhelmed, scared, busy, tired, alert, stressed, anxious. Thank you all for sharing. So I personally feel shaken, I think that would be my word for today, by the tone of our national conversation and how clearly it's sliding into dehumanization. I've been feeling the weight of stripping people of their humanity, and I find it saddening, I find it terrifying. And it's what we work truly every day to counter here at the Greater Good Science Center's Bridging Program. And that's also why we're offering this session. So when dehumanization rises, many of us might be experiencing a wide range of emotions. I have personally felt this tightness in my chest over the last month, and you might have been triggered to want to fight or flight, or a temptation to shut down altogether. And this is regardless of where your politics stand. So today we're going to do something practical. We're going to practice grounding, and we're going to explore patience and courage as capacities that help us stay steady and discerning also in a moment like this. So as I was preparing for today, I came across wisdom from Thich Nhat Hanh. The quote that came to mind was, "We are here to awaken from the illusion of our separatedness." Again, by Thich Nhat Hanh. So I want us to pause for a moment and stay with that. Awaken from the illusion of our separatedness. In our bridging work, we go by the guiding principles of love and justice. So love as a conscious choice to recognize the full humanity of others. So this love that fuels a desire to connect and to treat people with care. So more than simply resolving conflict, love is calling us to sustain the relationships and the conditions that allow people and communities to thrive. And justice we see as a commitment to confronting inequity, reducing exclusion, and creating environments where everyone belongs. We anchor this in the inherent value and dignity of all people. Justice is calling us to recognize unequal conditions and work to transform them. So the question for us is, how do we stay truly resourced enough to keep showing up for love and justice, with love and justice? And that's the purpose of today's webinar, to practice grounding and to learn how patience paired with courage, can interrupt reactivity and help us choose wiser action. The words of Marshall Rosenberg, founder of Nonviolent Communication, are also present for me today. And he says, violence is the tragic expression of unmet needs. So as we call out, feel, and hopefully move through this state of dehumanization, we must also sit with ourselves so we don't fall into the same trap. So while we're not asking people whose existence truly is being denied to just go bridge, right? We're not asking that. Today's Skillshare session is about how we regulate reactivity, how we protect our boundaries when needed, and that is necessary sometimes, and how we stay anchored in virtues that are important to us. So this is an invitation, especially for those of us who have enough steadiness and enough safety, to also resist becoming numb. We'll be practicing grounding, and we'll also explore how patience and courage can support us in this moment. So with that, I'm really excited to introduce today's guests. Beth Douthirt-Cohen builds spaces for racial disability, LGBTQ+, and gender justice, helping leaders and students build the somatic awareness, courage, skills, relationships, and compassion for collective transformation. At the University of Maryland School of Public Health, Beth's coaching, research, and teaching invites people to explore how we heal from the trauma of identity-based prejudice and how we can build authentic and durable solidarity across power and identity differences through our shared capacity to love, grow, connect, and create change. Welcome, Beth.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be in community with you all today.
Thank you, Beth. And then we have Sarah Schnitker, professor of psychology and neuroscience at Baylor University. She studies virtue and character development in adolescents and emerging adults with a focus on the role of spirituality and religion in virtue formation. Her research specializes in the study of patience, self-control, gratitude, generosity, and thrift. Sarah has published more than 100 peer-reviewed articles and edited chapters and has served as the principal investigator on multiple research grants. Sarah, so good to have you here.
Thanks for having me. I'm very excited to experience this session because I need some grounding today.
Don't we all? Well, that's a perfect segue as I was thinking of this session, and I was going back to our Bridging Differences in Higher Ed playbook. All of these sessions are inspired by our new playbook, and we'll be sharing a link in the chat. Beth, in that playbook, has a quote, and she says, when doing this work, we focus so much on the thinking, conscious brain, promoting intellectual humility or fostering emotional intelligence. But when it comes to emotion regulation and interactions across differences, there's so much to learn and honor in tapping into the wisdom of the body as well. Thank you, Beth, for that. I think that gives us a little grounding. This is why we're here today, folks. So before we jump into Beth and a few questions that we prepared for her, I want to give you a little context of her work. So in 2017, when Beth was Deputy Chief Diversity Officer at the University of Maryland, Lieutenant Richard J. Collins III was murdered on the University of Maryland campus by a white Maryland student who had ties to white supremacist groups. Lieutenant Collins was a Black ROTC student who had just been enlisted into the U.S. Army and was about to graduate from nearby Bowie State University, the oldest HBCU in the state of Maryland. In the wake of Lieutenant Collins's murder, at the prompting of the Collins's family, the schools recognized the need to work together to confront individuals and to combat the systems that perpetuate hate and inflict violence. And Beth was hired into the new position by the University of Maryland School of Public Health to join the team of people bringing to work these processes of truth, transformation, and reconciliation to life as a coach, as a researcher, and as a teacher. Deeply profound work. So Beth, in the wake of this campus tragedy, what did that moment make visible about what campuses need in terms of values and infrastructure?
So, thank you again for having me. It's an honor, right, to do this work in honor of Lieutenant Collins and with the Collins family and with our community here at the University of Maryland and at Bowie State University. And there were so many things that became clear to us in the aftermath of that moment. But definitely that there were ways that we prepared for really difficult conversations, that we had done that systematically, but then also maybe a little more superficially than we needed in that moment, especially in the wake of tragedy. That, like many institutions of higher ed, and those of you who are out there in higher education institutions know this, we had thought a lot about the work. We had thought a lot about what it means to be in community across difference, but we had not necessarily done work around what do our bodies need? What do the stress responses look like? How do we navigate a really hard moment like that? And show up as authentically as possible, honoring the life that was taken and how that murder was connected to honestly everything we do, right? And so there were a lot of questions around how do we prepare to honor what has occurred, to work with families, to work with an institution that was only 12 miles away from our institution. And I, who had done racial justice on our campus as a white woman for about 10 years at that point, had never been to the oldest HBCU in the state of Maryland, and what were the implications for that. And so there were a lot of questions around, where we were, where we had been, and where we were going.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that context, Beth. Thought it would be important to bring that to the top and center your amazing work and how you invite people through grounding and centering to be in the work when it's difficult. So I'd love to invite for you to guide us through a centering practice where we can all feel that magic that you infuse into what is really difficult and real work.
Great, thank you. So I just want to invite you all just to take a second. And if you're sitting or standing for this practice, you can sit, you can stand, you could lay, you could sit on the floor. What I'd love for you to do is to have access to ground. So that could be your feet on the ground, for example. Okay. And what we're going to practice is a centering in action. And what I mean by that is, what does it look like? What is your particular pathway between where you are at right now? You did a mood check, right? And a little bit ago, between where you are right now and your center. And so for this practice, you can keep your eyes open. I invite you to keep your eyes open if you're comfortable with that. What you'll see me do is sometimes close my eyes, sometimes keep my eyes open, and that's me finding my path, right, to center. Okay. So welcome to this centering practice. We center to be present to what is. Sometimes I know in my own journey, I sometimes have thought, oh, I need to center right now because I'm feeling overwhelmed and I want to push that overwhelm away. But actually centering, what it allows us to do is to hold that overwhelm, to be present with it, right? Or that grief or that exhaustion. So centering is not necessarily to move something away. Sometimes it does, right? Sometimes emotions shift during centering, but we center to be present to what is. We center to connect to ourselves right? To feel our own edges, to feel our own boundaries, and to be connected to others, to be purposeful. And what is so important when we're thinking about the topic of today's webinar is to have choice. So we center in order to have choice in any given moment. Centering allows us to hold any and all emotions, to stay present with those emotions. And I want you to begin by finding a comfortable posture. You can gently sway or move. Notice what your body needs to let your body arrive in this moment. Our bodies are often a few steps behind where our speaking selves might be. There is no one right way to your center. You're just finding your path to center today in this moment. So as we keep our eyes open or soft, we're practicing a balance between inward focus and connection to your surroundings at the same time. That I can feel myself and this whole Zoom room at the same time. That is possible for me. That I can stay centered and grounded while remaining present in the world. Throughout this practice, you do not need to be still. I just invite you to return to breath as much as possible. We're going to start just by noticing sensations in your body without changing them. The temperatures, the various temperatures in your body, sensations, movement. Are there places in your body that feel closer to you or further away? This is just a chance to check in with yourself. Listen to your body, your emotions, your thoughts, to get curious about yourself. Sometimes we approach our bodies with an element of control or energy of control. And actually here, we're just being curious. You're saying hello. Whatever your body is doing is okay. So often we push past this moment of noticing. We do that to be productive or to move forward, or sometimes to take care of others. Give yourself that time and space to just notice what is here. And when you're ready, I want you to put a hand or your awareness in your center of gravity. And for most of us, especially when we're standing, but even when we're seated, that's about 2 inches below your belly button. So just bringing your awareness to that pelvic bowl area, right, 2 inches below your belly button. And maybe slowly inviting your breath down into that space. You do not need to force it. You're just inviting it a little deeper. And as we center, we're going to center in 4 ways. Through our length, our width, our depth, and towards what we care about. So we're starting with our length. And what I want to invite you to do is to feel yourself dropping into the ground. Allowing gravity to hold you a little bit more. You can even send awareness or energy into the ground, into the rocks below you, beneath you. And as you do that, I want to also invite you to bring a little bit more space between each of your vertebrae and through the crown of your head, up towards the sky. So you're lengthening the space a little tiny bit between each of your vertebrae. And sometimes when we do this, we overextend. And I want to invite you here just to find a place that doesn't feel like an overextension. A way that you can both be in ground and add a little bit of space and a little bit of lengthening towards the crown of your head at the same time. And one way to think about our length is that it is a metaphor for our inherent dignity. There is not another thing you need to do to have access to this. Right? Breathing in your inherent worth. Feeling how much of your dignity you can feel right now in this moment. And next, we are going to center in your width. And so I want you to bring awareness to your sides, maybe from shoulder to shoulder. You can feel free to do touch if you want. Feel your edges, right? These edges that take care of you, that protect you, your boundaries. You might even be able to feel the energy of your body, which goes arguably a few inches off your body, right? You can feel those that energy and those edges. You can notice the balance between your left side of your body and your right side. Feel the space you take up and gently fill out that space. Width connects us to ourselves, our boundaries, as well as to others. That I can be both in connection with myself and with you all at the same time. Sometimes also with width, we need to unfurl a bit. We've maybe made ourselves smaller, or maybe we've overextended by making ourselves bigger. Either way, for protection. And what is the width that allows Beth to bring breath into center? And next, we're going to center in our depth. And so start by noticing your back body. If it is helpful to you, you can put hand on your back body, below shoulder blades, and a low back, backs of leg, back of your skull. What wants your attention, needs your attention? And one way to think about our back body is to imagine that all your wisdom, all your competencies, the ones you remember and the ones you don't, are all there at your back. The ancestors that believed in you, that sent love to you, the ones you know about and the ones you don't. All your past experiences are there at your back. And as we think about our depth, we next go in between our back body and front body, where all those organs are. The heart, the lungs, the juicy bits, all your guts. And you just put your awareness towards them. And we can think about this in-between space as where you are right now, your present moment. And then we come to front body. And if it is supportive of you, you can put a hand on heart and soft belly, wherever feels supportive to you, and play with pressure. Front body is our hopes, our intentions, where we want to go. And one of the things that we think about in all these dimensions is, do I have a balance here of front body and back body? Where do I need more balance? Where might I be overextending? And depth connects us to where we come from, where we are, and where we are going. And now we're going to hold our length and our width and our depth together as much as you are able to, feeling that dignity, feeling that depth, feeling that width, and bring in what matters to you. Maybe there's a word or a phrase or a quiet knowing. It does not need words. If you're unsure, you can gently ask yourself, what matters to me? What do I love? What am I longing for? And can I let this longing shape me? Shift some of my tissues, shift some of the ways that I am in this world. And finally, I want you to look around this virtual space at others or the people in your space, wherever you are, each of whom is a miracle, each of whom has your own longings, your own dignity, inherent worth. And I want you to finish by noticing you are still here, worthy and connected. And feel free to share your mood in the chat box of how you are right now. Again, we do not center to change moods, but just to know what's present for us now.
Thank you for that, Beth. Wow, that was very special. I know you were not centering to change moods, but I see a lot of change moods. Cared for, peaceful, validated, integrated, present, accepting. Ooh, and I love the anxious. Yeah, thank you all. Mm. Someone's saying they realize they're very forward motivated and that they need more back and grounding energy. Isn't that something?
Me too, friend, me too, always.
I see calmer sadness. Wow, it's very rich. Well, we see you all. Thank you, Beth, for allowing us to see ourselves and see each other through this practice. I also loved your invitation. Can I let this moment shift me? What does this moment mean for us? And can it shift us? So I want to move us to the current temperature in our country. You know, the us versus them, the language that we see, feel. What do you notice, Beth, in groups when dehumanization starts to take hold?
Yes, I appreciate this question. So, many of the contexts I'm in are, for example, racial justice dialogues or difficult conversations among community members or students. And, I think that the common ways that I see this appear is dismissive comments at first. It's typically dismissive comments. And when I feel like we're getting more into an us-them feeling or space. So defensiveness, dismissive comments are very common ways. Not hearing each other, kind of going more into debate. So, typically our spaces are set up very much grounded in dialogue. And that is a distinctively different feel. It's a different feel in my body. And I know it is in other people's bodies too. And so one of the things that I often think about is what are the gentle ways at first that we can bring people back to seeing each other's humanity? What do those moments look like? And often, kind of like a centering practice, it's slowing us down. Is there a way for us to slow down so that we can return to seeing the humanity of the people around us in the space. And so, what are ways that we can do that that reduce shame? So I think sometimes when we slow a conversation down, people then feel embarrassed because they realize, oh, it was very reactive, right? I was dismissive, or uh, I was not acting from choice. I was not acting from center. I was acting from a stress response, honestly. So we think a lot about how stress responses in the body result in us going into an us versus them. You are no longer part of my community. You are not no longer part of the us. And so in those moments, it feels just really important. What are our go-tos? So a long time in my early, especially my early facilitation, I'd have an index card of the go-tos. Right, my go-to phrases just to slow us down. So because when we co-regulate as humans, and so if other people are at defensiveness, dismissiveness, your body is also increasing in stress. And so I'd have my go-tos, my ways of reminding us that what we have common goals here. There's a reason we chose to be in this room together. Those reasons are not always the same, but there are reasons that we've decided to be in conversation with one another.
I'm sure everyone wants to know at least your favorite go-to phrase. We need that.
Mhm. So for like a dismissive comment, tell me the type of comment. Would it be for a
Well,
type of comment?
let's take Bad Bunny. It's good.
Okay.
You know,
Yeah.
dismissive.
A tweet that
That
says
was that was
the
awful.
worst, that was the
That was the
worst
worst
performance I've ever
ever.
seen.
No one understands this
And
guy. Sorry, didn't mean to get political, but
mhm,
what do you do?
yes. So, first of all, that it was an amazing performance, right? Bad Bunny's performance was amazing. And there's generational differences, and we can all feel different ways about Bad Bunny's performance.
Or his
So
music, but that aside.
I think my go-to there, if we were in the same room with one another, would be I just noticed a shift in energy when you said that.
Mm,
And I was wondering if people can speak to what's underneath either your comment or what's underneath the shift in energy.
mm.
Um, yeah. And maybe, I haven't actually had enough opportunities to discuss that particular tweet, for example, but I know for me, it was a shift in energy, right? And so I can imagine if we were in space together and that was named.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And I appreciate people. I think somebody's putting in. I would love other ways that people, right, would respond. I know we have go-tos. I do think might go to, I'd like to slow this down,
Yeah, I
like to
love that.
pause.
I love that. And I think the reason why this is relevant is because we got to know what to do so we don't jump into the othering that we are talking about here. So we don't jump into the dehumanizing and lean into curiosity with that go to question, Beth, and discover what's at stake for you. Tell me more. So I love that invitation. I'm also thinking about the impact of mindfulness, grounding, centering, whatever you want to call it, in the reduction of implicit racial and age bias. One of the studies that we have in our Bridging Differences playbook is by Luke and Gibson. It's a 2015 study, and they were testing automatic associations that can show up for people, even honestly, if our values don't align with them. So, what they did here is that college students listened to a 10-minute mindfulness audio or a neutral kind of control audio. And then they completed two implicit association tests, one on race and one on age. And what was interesting is that the mindfulness group showed a lower implicit bias on both tests, suggesting that mindfulness might kind of loosen that grip of kind of automatic associations and helping people notice thoughts and feelings without immediately reacting to them. So I'm pointing to that because I'd love to ask you, Beth, during high conflict moments on campus, have you seen this at play? How mindfulness can help people notice thoughts and feelings so that they're less reactive?
Yes. So, you know, we use a large smorgasbord of centering and mindfulness practices. And what these practices offer is, first of all, the idea that we have choice. And so, just using myself as an example, for example, in my early years, I started doing, as a white woman, racial justice dialogues. I guess my earliest ones were maybe 2006 or so. Um, and in my early years, I started as mindfulness was brought in, or body awareness, even somatic awareness was even brought in. I started realizing that my body was always pointed towards the door, right? Beth was always ready to run. But my conscious brain was like, no, I am all in, right? I am fully here, and present. And what I started to get feedback from, in particular from women of color, which I'm so grateful for, was, I don't think you're fully showing up. And I was like, wait, what? I'm fully showing up. I'm fully here, right? And so one of the things that we have realized through doing these practices is it allows people to have the somatic awareness to understand what stress responses their body is going through, right? And so for me, it was somewhere between like fight and flight, but often flee, right? It was often kind of, my body was ready to go very early on. And so what these practices do is allow people to be more present to what is, to be more with each other, to be more in relationship to one another, and have more choice. That I have choice in this moment. I can be fully in anger and rage and fury, and still be centered and grounded. And I think that that is not something, at least I or most of the people I've worked with have had the opportunity to do.
Mm, thank you, Beth. In an article that we can share with the group that we published in our magazine Greater Good a few months back, you said something that kind of was present for me now that you were speaking, which is that bridging can't run on pity, charity, or looking like a good person, that it has to connect to survival and humanity. Can you say more?
Yeah, absolutely. So I deeply believe in the concept of interest convergence, that you really have to have true interest convergence in this, that it has to be connected to your own sense of self, your own soul, right? To be able to fully stay in the work. And I think often across difference in particular, and obviously we're talking about race in this instance, there's specific ways that culture allows us to interact across difference. And those ways are modeled for us, like pity or charity, a savior, right? Complex, for example. And each of those actually, I think, keep us more distant from each other purposefully, right? There's reasons for charity, for example, at moments, right? If I fall down in front of you and everything falls all over the floor, I want you to help me, right? I want that helping in that moment. But we need other ways to be with one another. And so we need to get clearer on our own self-interest in doing this work. And for me, for example, the work that I have done around centering, around grounding it has impacted my entire life. I would say more than anything, my parenting, for example, where I am most reactive. Anyone else? It's my most reactive space in my life and in terms of my whole life. And so this work is deeply connected to my self-interest. And in terms of having real relationships with one another, right? Real community, not the superficial community that I think we are often offered through those other types of connection.
Thank you, Beth. All right. Well, I'm going to move us along. I know Beth has a lot more to share, and I know folks have a lot of questions, and we'll get to those as well. So we'll be bringing Beth back. But I think right now we're going to move on to bring in Sarah. And I just want to contextualize that in our Bridging Differences in Higher Ed playbook, the practice of mindfulness is noted as cultivating patience and drawing on courage, curiosity, and empathy. And this was part of work that we did for several months with a group of character experts, including Sarah herself. So she herself helped us arrive with these, arrive to these character virtue tags. And I really want Sarah to talk a little bit about her work, and then I have a few questions from her. So, we've looked at mindfulness from a few angles, right, as a practice that can help us notice what's happening inside of us and how we can reduce those automatic responses. And Sarah's research helped us name that mindfulness is building something in us over time, right? It's not just this momentary pause, but a deeper character capacity to stay engaged when things get hard that Beth also speaks about. So she did a great study published in the Journal of Positive Psychology that I could, move on to her to explain. But I think for the sake of time, I'll just go ahead and summarize it super quickly, and then we'll get into some questions as well. So what's interesting about this study is that Sarah's team explored whether reflecting on virtues like courage and patience could help white college students show up more constructively in interracial interactions, especially at a time when conversations about race can trigger many different things for many different people. So what they did is they randomly assigned 292 white college students to read short student stories in four conditions. So the first one was stories that featured courage and patience in interracial interactions, stories about virtues like courage and patience without racial content, and stories about interracial interactions without virtue framing or neutral context or content. And what stood out was that the group that was reading the courage and patience stories in explicit interracial contexts and then reflected on how they might act actually were showing an increase in the importance of acting in non-prejudicial ways. Mm-hmm. And then there was also a finding, which was a little, sobering, which is that when students read about interracial interactions without a constructive virtue path forward, their courage and motivation to respond without prejudice actually declined. So the takeaway here is that when people are feeling threatened, we often need more than awareness of bias, right? We need a growth-oriented roadmap for how to stay engaged so we don't shut down or get defensive or default to dehumanizing stories about each other. So, Sarah, amazing work. Thank you. And I'd love to start with patience because at this moment, patience can get mistaken for passivity.
Yep.
So, how do you define it and why does it matter for this work?
Thank you, Juliana. Um, you know, I think patience is so interesting, Beth, when you were taking us through the exercise and have been talking, um, you really pushed on this idea that it takes time to see the humanity in others. And so when we talk about patience as a virtue, I see it as this ability to remain calm during that time period and to be able to be in our bodies calm enough that we can take the time that it actually needs to be able to make those choices. As Beth was talking, I called to mind this quote I love from Viktor Frankl, who wrote Man's Search for Meaning, talking about his horrendous experiences in a concentration camp during the Holocaust. But he created a whole method of therapy out of this. And his quote that I just always comes to mind is he says, between stimulus and response, there is a space. And in that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. And I think that patience as a virtue is what allows us to take advantage of that space and really make choices on what we want to do in order to meet our goals. And so I think sometimes, especially in this cultural context, we are about instant gratification and activity and motion, and activity just has to happen now. And yes, things are urgent and we do need to take actions, but patience is what allows us to just take that pause and decide, is this a moment for waiting or is it a moment for action? And Juliana, I think if you could show the diagram, I've in my work shown that patience is really a complementary virtue alongside courage, and that what we are trying to do in this world is to act with love and with justice when we're thinking about our virtues. And that sometimes we need action, sometimes we need to pause. And when people have both patience and courage, they're able to really engage pursuit of love and justice with wisdom and to do what is needed to get there. And so what we see is that patience oftentimes is weaponized or used inappropriately to push people into apathy or to passivity or submissiveness. And that is not at all what patience is. Instead, patience is maintaining that goal of love and justice. And it's not being reckless about it or pushing forward too fast. And it's not also disengaging because you are so dysregulated that you have to flee, or become your stress response just makes you freeze. It's be able to stick in there in that moment. And our work shows that patience and courage are complementary in that too much patience might be apathy. And that's actually what the deficiency of courage is. And conversely, deficient patience is recklessness, but that's what excessive courage might be. And so we find empirically over time that these two virtues, if we cultivate, if someone has both of them in their pursuit of a goal, they don't fall prey to these kind of vices, to use the virtue and vice language of these two virtues. And instead, they're able to really do what is needed to act with love and justice because patience allows them to take that space and courage allows them to act even when it's really difficult. And so I think that's a really important framing, um, and that we should never be telling someone else, you just need to be more patient. Just wait. That's not what patience does. Patience says, no, action is needed, but I'm going to choose when and how and with my whole self be able to engage because of that grounding that Beth talked about.
Thank you, Sarah. See love coming through. Thank you, Kelly. Yes, Viktor Frankl, amazing quote. I just put it in the chat for folks. One of my longtime mentors loves that one as well, and it's been close to my heart. So let's go back to your study because I know virtues
Mhm.
helped only when students considered courage and patience in explicitly interracial contexts. Why does that specificity matter?
Well, I think, virtues have to be contextualized. And I think especially um, in contexts that are difficult, we need a little bit of modeling in that specific type of context. So it's one thing to talk about patience and courage in general for relationships are really helpful. Um, but many of us want to just avoid the things that are most difficult because we know our stress response is going to be activated. And that in these exercises, in this intervention we gave, we needed to show that, oh, you know what? There is a pathway. And the stories were written from um, advanced students, so juniors and seniors at the institution the student was at. And so saying, oh, I've done this. it is possible. And here's how I drew upon my patience and courage to try something new, to have a conversation that was hard around race. Um, to just consider that maybe what I was doing was not helpful for others and might have come from my own biases. I think you have to contextualize it so that students can see, oh, this is a place that my patience and courage can come to bear. And I don't need to be as afraid, and I can actually think about it in this context, um, and have a plan of what to do moving forward.
That's so helpful. I think, yeah, the plan, the agency
The agency, exactly.
that naming the virtues, yeah, gives to people. And just as a final wrap up before we jump into questions that folks might have, I was just wondering for, someone who's watching, and I know it may be a tricky question, but who feels like they're living in a high reactivity environment right now, and this question is for both Beth and Sarah, what's one small practice that can help build patience in a way that's realistic?
I think, uh, I think what Beth just taught us today is amazing, and just to take a part of our body to focus on. The other thing I would say, especially for myself, when I'm in a really kind of couple weeks or months of feeling just like I'm always on this reactive edge, sometimes I also try to create a friction in my practice of like, okay, need to center body, but also, you know what? I'm always going to pause 5 minutes before sending email. I'm going to set a timer. So using also kind of environmental cues to help myself pause. Um, Instead of just moving forward to action, because I might not be able to instantly calm myself, but having that kind of rule for myself that then gives me the space to do the grounding work that's needed is often really important. So I'm never going to post, say, on social media. I'm always going to make myself wait 30 minutes over the next week as I see things come up or whatever it may be that you need. I found that is kind of creates that space for patience, and then I can do the hard work of grounding with that space rather than immediately reacting. I don't know, Beth, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I really love that. I've not tried the timer before sending an email, but that would probably be helpful to me. I think I said this at the beginning of the centering practice, and I think it's really true, is practice, find things that allow you to have access to your center. So for me, for example, I have about 10 practices I typically choose from, and they have had to change over time. And so, and practice it in the grocery store, practice it in traffic when you're annoyed, practice it, right? If you do it in these other spaces, I guess the research shows 300 repetitions of your pathway to center, it is more likely you will do it automatically. And 3,000 repetitions in, you are more likely to do it under pressure. And so I know for me, a big part of patience for me, I can have a ton of patience with Sarah, for example, with someone else, but
Yeah.
having patience with myself is what Beth really needs to practice, right? Is self-compassion. And then I'm more likely to have it with others, especially in high reactivity spaces. So you all probably have a sense of what works for you. And what does it look like to dial that up in terms of your practices? That especially I think, I often think about how do we stay resourced enough
Mhm.
to act from choice. And that is very hard in this world with all of the pressures and all of the demands coming in constantly. What does it look like to create enough spaces and enough practices, like a 5 minutes before an email, right? That during that time, you're trying to return your breath to your pelvic bowl, right? For example, as one way, because breath is bridged to the body. It gives you more choice and offers that opportunity.
Thank you both. I know I was just coming across a question in the chat from Danetta. She was asking for go-to phrases. Do you use you and your, or do those tend to trigger defensiveness?
So yes, there's a few go-tos that are known to trigger defensiveness in English. It looks different in different languages, but you, yours, right? It's a you is a version of them. It's a version
Mhm.
of distancing, and so. Yes, and so is the word why can also trigger. I use the word why all the time. Sorry. But it's about tone, right? There's certain
Mhm.
words in the English language that people then feel like, oh, you're saying you're not me, right?
Mhm.
It's more likely. And so I typically say, and I only do this if it's true and authentic, but I can imagine some of us feel this way, or I can imagine not everyone liked Bad Bunny's performance. I can imagine that, right? That's not my experience, but I can imagine it. So let's have a real conversation about what it made you feel or what happened there for you, right? So relating in when it's genuine. It feels most important to me. Trying to see the humanity of the person um, who maybe you feel like they're not seeing your humanity. And there's boundaries to that, right? I have clear
Mhm.
boundaries, clear edges around
Mhm.
that. But if in particular the goal is for us to connect and to have a heart conversation, what does that look like?
Thank you for naming that. There's a beautiful also reflection in the chat by Ruben, which I won't have a
Mhm.
chance to read, but thanks, Ruben, for that.
Mhm.
And I just want to say a minute out. Thank you so much, Beth and Sarah, for your wisdom,
Mhm.
for your care, also for the steadiness that you brought to this moment, to this room. And thanks to all of you for being here. Your attention, your comments, your willingness to be here, to stay in this work right now truly matters. So, thank you to our production team behind the scenes working to make this session possible. And before we close, I want to invite you to our next Bridging Differences in Higher Education session, which is Courageous Curriculum, Expanding Students' Circles of Care through out of the ordinary experiences. We're going to have Jonathan Thigpen, who's a pharmacy professor
Mhm.
at Samford University, Brianna Watson, who's a graduate student at Samford, and Elik Dekais, a character scientist who's also part of our character advisory committee, and that's on March 6th. Also deeply thankful for all of the funders who make this work possible and for the broader community of educators and practitioners who keep finding ways to protect dignity and grow belonging, especially when it's not easy. Thank you, Beth. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you,
Thank
everyone.
you.
We appreciate you.
Thank you.
Oh,
Take care, everyone.
take care.